Welcome back to Northern Tales, where exile doesn't end the story, it starts a new one. In part 3, Ladi fought back, and the prize was heavy. Humiliation, a father's slap, and a door slammed behind her for the last time. But some girls don't break when they are thrown out. They rise. This is part 4 of Ladi's story. A new village, a quiet house, and the kind of love that doesn't shout. It wraps you in a wrapper and waits for you to breathe. Because sometimes the people who didn't birth you still know how to mother you. Every girl deserves to be seen. Every voice deserves to be heard. After the divorce, Indo didn't cry. Not in front of Ladi. She just moved. One bag for clothes, one for memories, and the silence between them heavy as a stone. They walked before dawn, mother and daughter. No cart, no goodbyes, just dust. The next village wasn't far, but it felt like another world. They arrived at her father's house just as the call to prayer floated into the air. A quiet compound, tucked behind neem trees. Lines of fabric flapped in the morning breeze. Deep blues, faded purples, rich indigos. Her grandfather was sitting outside, a short stool, a bowl of warm water at his feet. His palms were stained blue, not from paint, but from years of dipping clothes into dye and history. He had been a dyer. His father before him, and his father before that. It wasn't just a trade, it was a lineage. He didn't work much now. His knees ached, his back groaned. But one of Indo's brothers had modernized the business, built proper vats, added machines, and because of that, the old man lived in dignity, no longer bending over tubs of dye, but still revered, still respected, still cared for. Indo's mother, Ladi's grandmother, had died when Indo was still young. Breast cancer, they said. She was the first wife, the kind that leaves a hole when she goes. Her father had remarried, a woman named Zainab, but everyone just called her Mama. She had raised Indo and her siblings like they were her own, cooked for them, fought for them, prayed over them, and had her own children too. But she never made a difference between mine and yours. She was steady, warm, the kind of woman whose presence feels like shea butter, soft, quiet, healing. And in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the day slowed, she would sit beside her husband, pour his tea and say with a smile, "I may be your second wife, but I know your first love left a space no woman can fill." And the old man would chuckle, not loudly, but in that quiet way men do when something deep has been touched. He didn't speak much about Indo's mother, but when he looked at Indo and later at Ladi, you could feel it. The love hadn't left. It had just changed form. Indo told him everything. Not all at once, but slowly, in between sips of tea and the washing of plates. She spoke of the insults, the shouting, the slap. The night Baral raised a piece of firewood against his own daughter, the moment he told her and Ladi to leave. Her father didn't interrupt, didn't sigh, didn't clutch his chest like the old men in films. He just sat there, still, as if his body had become a quiet house for the storm inside. And when Indo fell silent, he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He just stared at the ground and traveled back to a different time, a different girl, a different Eid. her. The first time he saw Indo's mother was in the village square during Salah. The drummers were loud, the children louder, but she was stillness. There was something in the way she stood, like the long-lost princess of a kingdom that no longer remembered her name. She didn't laugh like the others, didn't tug at rappers or exchange gossip. She simply stood, tall, calm, eyes like a storm behind glass. He remembered asking a friend, "Who is that girl?" And the friend had scoffed. "Ah, that one. She thinks she's better than all of us. A real sump, always walking like she owns the ground." But he hadn't been put off. No, that was what drew him in. She wasn't loud, she wasn't violent, but there was a steel in her, quiet and unbending. The kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to make a man feel small. And now, decades later, sitting on this same stool, with his hands still faintly stained by indigo and years, he realized something that made his heart ache. Ladi was her echo. The way she walked, the way she held her ground, the storm behind the silence. He hadn't seen it until now. And maybe Barao had seen it too and didn't know how to live with it. Some men destroy what they can't control. Others live long enough to regret it. After Indo's quiet telling of events, her father said nothing. Not that day, not the next, but something in him shifted. He began to observe Ladi more closely, not with suspicion, but with a kind of soft, searching curiosity. And when she thought no one was watching, he watched. He noticed how she folded her wrapper twice before sitting, just like her grandmother used to. How she always rinsed the cup before pouring water, even when it was already clean. How she stared into space sometimes, brow furrowed, as if trying to solve something the rest of the world couldn't see. A quiet thinker, a watcher, a fire wrapped in stillness. And once, just once, he caught her laughing at something the neighbor's child said. The laugh was sharp, sudden, and for a moment, he saw his late wife. Not her face, but the spirit that lived behind her eyes. He smiled to himself, then looked away. 3 weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, he sent a message to Barao. "Come." No threats, no commands, just an invitation. Barao came, shoulders stiff, eyes weary. Indo didn't attend the meeting. This was between men. The old man sat in his usual place, stool low to the ground, tea beside him. He didn't waste time, didn't offer platitudes. He simply asked, "Tell me, Barao, apart from this issue with Ladi, have you had any other problem with my daughter?" Barao shifted, looked away, then muttered, "No, not really." He tried to speak further, to explain himself, to say something about discipline, stubbornness, maybe pride. But the old man raised one palm. Silence. "Don't blame her alone," he said softly. "You are Ladi's father. You were there her whole life. So if she's wild, why didn't you tame her?" The words stung. Barao's jaw tightened. His fingers curved, but he didn't speak. Because the question wasn't cruel. It was true. The old man continued. "Children are different. One listens, one rebels. One breaks, one bends." He leaned back. Sometimes that bad behavior you hate so much is a quiet cry, a small fire asking to be seen. Barao stared at the ground. Then the proposal. Simple. Take Indo back if you want her. But leave the girl. Let Ladi stay with me. For the first time, Barao didn't argue. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was relieved. Either way, he agreed. Indo was sent for. A small gathering was called. A few elders. A few quiet words. No shame, no drama, and just like that, Indo returned to her husband's house. But Ladi stayed behind. In the house of the man who saw in her the ghost of the girl he once loved. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance to do things differently. Ladi didn't cry when Barao slapped her. She didn't cry when the village whispered. She didn't even cry when Tango bled. But the day Indo left, she broke. Indo didn't make a speech. She didn't hug too long or look back too often. She simply packed her things, tied her scarf, and walked out through the wooden gate. And Ladi stood at the window, still as dust, watching her mother fade into the road like smoke. That night, Ladi didn't speak. Not during the meal. Not when her grandmother placed a warm plate of tuwo before her. Not even when her grandfather came home with 2 sticks of suya wrapped in newspaper, the soft kind she used to like. She said nothing. Just went to her mouth, called in like a question mark, and stared at the ceiling as if it owed her answers. In the darkness, her chest tightened. So this was the plan all along, she whispered to herself. Get rid of me, send Mama back to her life, and leave me behind like I was the problem. The words didn't echo, heavy. Her grandmother tried. Soft teases, sweet pawpaw slices, even a story about how Indo once refused to bathe for a whole week at her age. But nothing worked. Ladi didn't laugh. She didn't eat. She didn't even look up. On the 3rd day, her grandmother sat on the edge of her mat, hands folded like worry. I'm scared, she whispered to her husband later that night. What if she doesn't come out of it? But the old man only sighed, stirred his tea and said, give her time. She's not lost. She's grieving. When a fire goes quiet, it doesn't mean it's dead. It just means it's looking for air. They just sank. Ladi began to return. Not all at once. It started with the little things. Fetching water from the well without being asked. Helping her grandmother sift millet on the veranda. Sweeping the compound at sunrise. Wrapper tied tightly. Brow still furrowed, but heart a little lighter. And then a smile. Small, slanted, the kind you almost miss if you blink. But her grandmother saw it, and when she did, she whispered a quiet Alhamdulillah into the sky. One evening, just before Maghrib, Ladi sat beside her grandfather under the neem tree. The call to prayer hadn't yet begun, and the village air was wrapped in that soft hush before nightfall. She cleared her throat. Baba, I want to go back to school. He didn't respond right away. Just sipped his tea, eyes still on the dye-soaked fabric hanging on the line. Then he nodded. We'll ask for a transfer. He wasn't a man who spoke much, and he didn't always understand girls, but he understood school. Or at least he was learning to. Once he believed girls should be married early before they brought shame, before they discovered too much, before their tongues grew louder than their fathers. But time had softened that view. It was hard to argue with evidence. Indo's brother, the one who modernized the family's dye business, now sold rich indigo agbadas to ministers in Abuja. He had built a store, bought a car, and even secured a loan from a bank, the kind of thing no uneducated man could dream of. Education had opened doors, big doors, and the old man knew it. But Ladi was a different kind of worry. In the quiet of his mind, even as he nodded to her request, something tugged at him. Yes, Barao overreacted. That much was clear. But still, Ladi could be excessive. Too bold. Too quick to fight. She didn't have that soft, shrinking manner that girls in their worlds were taught to perfect. It wasn't just that she reminded him of her grandmother, though she did. The stare, the stillness, the refusal to bend. But there was something else. Something deeper, more wounded, that made her edge sharper than it needed to be. He wasn't sure where it came from, but he knew this. He had a Herculean task ahead. Raising this girl with all her fire, all her ache, all her quiet rage. He couldn't silence her. He wouldn't shame her. But maybe, just maybe, school would give her something else to anchor to. Something steady. Something bigger than her anger. A path. Or at the very least, a place where she could stop feeling like a problem and start becoming her own person. Ladi hated her new school. Not because she didn't want to learn, but because the building looked like it had given up before she ever arrived. The walls were cracked, the blackboards faded, and there were never enough chairs. Students took turns sitting, some stood through entire lessons. The windows had no panes, just rusted bars and prayers. It was the only secondary school in the village. A tired place, forgotten by a government, abandoned by ambition. Most of the teachers were NYSC corps members, young strangers from faraway places. They wore bright shirts and unfamiliar smiles. Their accents were strange, their food even stranger. But they came with one thing Ladi could never resist: books. She devoured them like stolen fruit. Dog-eared novels, tattered textbooks, literature anthologies passed from hand to hand like smuggled gold. Her favorite spot was under the mango tree, near the old classroom block. That's where she hid during break. Knees drawn to her chest, novel in hand, mind in Lagos, London, or the moon. The other girls avoided her. She was too quiet, too serious, too different. The boys called her Book Witch. Not kindly, not playfully, but Ladi didn't care. Not when she read about cities where girls became lawyers, doctors, astronauts. Once she came across a scene in a novel where the heroine slapped her uncle for insulting her. Ladi laughed so hard the book fell from her lap. One afternoon, as she sat beneath that mango tree, her back against peeling concrete, she made a decision. She would write. Not another diary entry, not a secret poem, a letter to the local government chairman. She had heard one of the corps members mention his name during assembly, how he promised to donate chalk and never showed up. Ladi found his name, his title, his office, and she wrote, not with begging, not with anger, but with clarity, with facts, with fire laced in calm. She described the cracked walls, the broken chairs, the dust that clung to their skin when the wind blew during math class. She wrote about the girls who dropped out because there were no toilets, the boys who now sold groundnuts instead of attending school. And at the end, she asked one question. Would you let your daughter study here? She gave the letter to a corps member from Kogi who raised a brow and said, You're sure you want to send this? Ladi only nodded. 2 weeks later, the compound changed. First came a delegation, then photos, then a man in a suit who kept adjusting his cap and calling her young lady of vision. Then came the contractors, the paint, the wood, the tiles for a new toilet block. Ladi's name was never announced, but the corps members knew. Her classmates knew. Even the mango tree knew. And for the first time, the boys didn't call her Book Witch. They just stared at her with something close to respect. And one of the girls, the one who never used to speak to her, tapped her arm gently and asked, Can I borrow one of your books? And Ladi, the girl they tried to exile, just smiled and passed the story on. Her name was Rabi, the most popular girl in school. Her father owned the biggest compound in the village. the one with the satellite dish and the silver gate. She wore gold bangles to class, changed her sandals twice a day, and spoke with a softness that made boys lean in. When she tapped Ladi that day under the mango tree and asked to borrow a book, Ladi's chest tightened. Not in fear, in surprise. Because no one had ever asked. No one had ever looked at her with anything other than suspicion or pity. And now, here was Rabi, the girl with perfect nails and a future husband already chosen, calling her friend. For the first time in her life, Ladi walked into a group and sat in the center. She laughed when they laughed. She listened to their whispers about wedding colors, gele styles, and suitors from Sokoto. She didn't always understand, but she stayed because it felt good to be wanted, to belong, to be seen without being judged. But it didn't last. Not for long. Ladi began to notice. Rabi didn't ask questions to hear answers. She asked so she could answer herself. Do you know how much my father spent on my engagement clothes? My wedding would be bigger than anyone's in this school. She used girls like mirrors, not for connection, but for reflection. And Ladi was never one to grease anyone's ego, not even a shiny one wrapped in gold bracelets. The old Ladi, the one with the smirk and the spine, began to return. She laughed less, answered back more, and soon enough, Rabi didn't like that. Gossip floated through the school like harmattan dust. Is it true Ladi beat up a man? Is it true she was chased from her house? And Rabi, sitting under the tree with her polished friends, smiled as she lit the match. I heard she used to live with a wrestler. No wonder she behaves like a man. Maybe that's why no one wants her. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp, and they were meant to hurt. Ladi said nothing that day. But the fire inside her, the one she thought school would quiet, began to roar again. On a Tuesday afternoon, as the last bell rang and students flooded the dusty path home, Ladi cornered Rabi behind the staff block. No words, just fury, just fists. Rabi screamed, scratched, but Ladi was done with silence. She beat her until her cheeks swelled and her bangles broke. It took 2 boys and a teacher to pull her off. By then, Rabi's scarf was on the ground, her pride bleeding from the corners of her mouth. The village buzzed. And it didn't take long for Rabi's father to arrive at the grandfather's house. Storming, cursing, your wild dog of a granddaughter. I'll report her to the police. She'll pay for this. The old man said nothing at first. Just looked at the man with eyes older than pride. Then softly, he pleaded, apologized, offered to cover the medical expenses, even called 2 elders to intervene. This girl has seen too much, one of them said, and your daughter should know better than to drag another girl's shame into the market. In the end, Rabi's father agreed, not because he was satisfied, but because enough people had gathered, and sometimes ego listens when community speaks. That night, Ladi sat outside alone. Her fist sore, her heart sore too. Because even when she wins, it always feels like a loss. 3 days after the fight, her grandfather called her. Escort me to the dye factory, he said. No anger in his voice, but no warmth either. Ladi's heart clenched. Was this it? Was he going to send her away too? The silence since the Rabi incident had eaten at her like termites in wood. She wanted to ask, but fear kept her lips sealed. They walked together through the narrow village paths, passing chickens, old women with raffia baskets, and boys chasing tires with sticks. Finally, halfway to the factory, her grandfather spoke. You remind me of someone, he said. My first wife, your grandmother. His voice softened. She couldn't be pushed, couldn't be silenced, had an opinion about everything. He paused and looked at Ladi. Just like you. But do you know the difference between you two? Ladi shook her head. He smiled, sad and sweet. She never raised her voice, never lifted a hand. She didn't need to. When she spoke, people listened, because wisdom doesn't shout. They stopped by a small roadside table. He bought her sugar cane, the kind she loved as a little girl. He handed it to her without a word, and then gently laid a hand on her shoulder. "You know what you did with the school," he said. "That was quiet strength. That is the kind of power the world cannot mock." He looked into her eyes, deeper than he ever had. "I know the gossip about you and Sarki Tanko hurts, and I know what happened was true. But child, when you fight fire with fire, sometimes it's your own house that burns." His voice trembled now, not with anger, but with love. "Promise me something, Ladi. Take all the rage, all the hate, all the fire in your chest and turn it into something useful." He tapped her chest gently. "Don't be the child people use as a warning. Be the one they point to with pride." He wagged his finger, teasing but firm. "If you can't win with your mouth, and your mouth only, then walk away. Just walk away." Ladi looked down at the sugar cane in her hand, then up at the man who had not abandoned her. And in that moment, not out of fear, not out of shame, she made a promise. To him and to herself, she would rise, not in noise, but in meaning. She would become a story, worth telling for all the right reasons. You have been listening to Northern Tales, where fire doesn't always burn. Sometimes it builds. This was the end of part 4 of Ladi's story. A beating, a warning, a promise. She's no longer the same girl the village tried to tame. But can she truly change? Or is fire simply her nature? In part 5, we follow Ladi's journey as she tries to walk the path of peace and discovers that even quiet girls carry storms. Subscribe to Northern Tales to follow Ladi's transformations. Every girl deserves to be seen. Every voice deserves to be heard.